Need a full spin. Yes. Hey guys, welcome back. Today on the bench is a 12 volt 100 amp hour Lifepo4 battery by Siekon. Let's take a look at the datasheet. Looking at the datasheet, we can see that this battery has a capacity of 1.28 kilowatt hours with a cycle life of 5,000 cycles at 0.2 C. This means if you want the battery to last 5,000 cycles, you would need to stay within the recommended charge and discharge rate of 20 amps. It has a max continuous discharge of 100 amps with a 150 amp surge for 3 seconds. You can combine a maximum of 16 batteries in series parallel configuration to create a large battery bank of 20 kilowatt hours. Links to the battery and datasheet can be found in the video description below. Be sure to use my coupon code to get a discount. On with the testing. Okay, so the battery's been fully charged and it's been sitting for about 12 hours. But before we do our capacity test, we're going to do a resting voltage test. The resting voltage is the voltage at which the battery settles down after the charge current has been removed. A good resting voltage is between 13.6 and 13.8 volts. So we're getting 13.82 volts, so that's pretty good. So another way to do the resting voltage test is just plug in the charger after you've already charged the battery, and it should top off the charge relatively quick, within about a minute or so. We can also check that the cutoff voltage is 14.6 volts. So we're already at 14.38. About 30 seconds. $14.61. There it is, it cut off. 14.61 on the nose. Okay, so now we're going to test the BMS's over voltage protection feature. Alright, so we have Wampa set to 14.6 volts roughly. Once we connect it, we'll introduce a little bit of current and we'll bring the voltage up to about 16 volts, and the BMS should trigger protection mode and shut down the charging. Get this thing to stay. Okay, we're pushing 14.6 volts, 2 amps. There it goes, it kicked it out. So that works. Okay, next up, capacity test. Now this is a 100 amp hour battery, so we should get at least 100 amp hours. Alright, so I got the battery connected to the ZKE tester. Our resting voltage is 14.2 volts. Let's start the test. This battery tester is insanely loud. Okay, it's going to take about 10 hours to complete this test, so I'll see you back in 10 hours. Okay, the capacity test is done. It's been 8 hours and 23 minutes. We discharged the battery all the way down to 10 volts, and that's where we cut off. Let's take a look. 105 amp hours. So that's pretty good. We have a very nice discharge curve. The rated capacity is 100 amp hours or 1.28 kilowatt hours, compared to our test results of almost 105 amp hours at 1.34 kilowatt hours. Okay, this next test is going to be a good one. We're going to do a short circuit test. Any good BMS should detect a very low resistance when a short circuit occurs. That's essentially what you have. You have no load, you're going to have a very low resistance, and it should immediately cut off the power to the load. So we're going to test that. Okay, so we're using a 150 amp breaker, and we're going to connect it directly from the positive to the negative. But before I connect this permanently, I'm going to do a quick jab on the negative terminal, just to show you what a short circuit could look like if you, say, dropped a tool on top of the terminals. Now it may not look like the BMS is doing anything, but it actually is. So you saw I jabbed it twice, and we got 2 sparks, so this BMS has a very quick recovery. So the next thing we're going to do is use the breaker, connect it up, and we're going to see exactly how fast that recovery is. So here we go, we're going to flip the breaker. So if it was continually supplying current through the BMS, through the breaker, this breaker would be hot by now, and it would have already tripped. So we can see the BMS is shutting off. I can't say that there's an actual delay in which it turns back on automatically. It just basically stays off as long as the short condition exists. Okay, so in some batteries, the BMS, if it detects a short circuit, will remain off for 30 seconds or 5 minutes, or it just depends on whatever the configuration of the BMS is. This one appears to stay off, well, at least as long as I tested it. As long as the short circuit condition exists, the BMS cuts the power off. As soon as you remove the short circuit condition, the BMS restores the power. Okay, the next test we're going to do are load tests. So we have the battery connected up to this 2000 watt inverter, and we have a couple of space heaters connected to the inverter. So we're going to test it at 200 amps or greater, and then we're going to test it at 150 amps, which is the rated surge capacity. Alright, so the first test will be a 200 amp test. Let's turn on the first space heater. What we should see is a complete disconnect, so it shouldn't be able to hold this very long. Okay, so we're pulling 40 amps right now. Now let's kick the other space heater on. About 130 amps right now. Now we're going to jack it up to 200, 230, and it's off. Okay, so I had to get pretty creative on my loads in order to get as close as to 150 as possible. So I'm using 2 battery chargers and a space heater. So let's go. First turn on the battery chargers. That gets us to about 20 amps. Now we'll turn on the space heater. And we're just looking for 3 seconds. So we're pushing 158 amps right now. We got about 5 seconds. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 21, 22, 23, 24. "30 seconds. So we're about a minute in now, holding 150 amps. So that's good. That's better than the rated value. Okay, so both of those tests meet or exceed the expectations. We did an overcurrent protection at 200 amps and it disconnected the load in 1 second. We also did a maxed discharge of 150 amps for at least 3 seconds, and we saw that held for 1 minute. So that definitely beat the expectations or the advertised rate of just 3 seconds. So I'm charging the battery up now, and the next test we'll do a full discharge at the rated max continuous discharge rate of 100 amps. Okay, so we got these 2 battery chargers charging up that battery down there. That gives us about 20 amps. And we got this space heater here pushing about 80 amps. So that gives us right about 106 amps. Perfect. I'll come back in about 10 minutes. We'll check the heat on the battery and see how it's going. Alright, it's been about 15 minutes and the outside temps of the battery case is between 85 and 90 degrees. And we're still holding 108 amps. The battery has not shut off yet. We'll come back in about 30 minutes and we'll check it again. Okay, so we're just about 35 minutes in now, and the top of the battery has reached 125 degrees. That's most likely where the BMS is sitting, so all the heat's generating from the top. But the battery has not shut down, so that's really good. It's been over 30 minutes and it keeps on going. And we're running about 110% capacity on this battery. So we'll come back near the end and check it again. Okay, we're approaching the last 10 minutes of this test. The battery should finally run out of juice in about 10 minutes. Still sitting about 125 degrees on the surface. Close to 130 actually. Once we get below 11, it's going to start dropping pretty rapidly. Oh, there goes the inverter. Low voltage on the battery. 10.7. And it's been about 55 minutes. Oh, now the inverter's really freaking out. I think it shut down. So that's right on. So the battery did quite well actually. It was able to sustain 108% through the entire discharge of the battery until that last 0.5 volts. The inverter cuts off at 10.5 volts, so we weren't able to get that little last 5 volts, but there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't do that extra bit of time, maybe like 30 seconds or less. And it didn't overheat or shut down, so yeah, it's actually pretty good. What I'd like to do is find a load that doesn't care about the voltage and see if we can trigger the under voltage, which should be at 10 volts. That's when the BMS shuts down the battery completely. The saucepan is back. Alright, you guys may have remembered this from the past. It's crude, but it works. And this will definitely drain the battery to the bitter end. So we'll turn it on here and we'll see what the voltage is going to be. It's 11.6 at rest. Now we're going to plug in our load. This draws about 10 amps. Okay, see the voltage drop to 10.9. We're pulling 10 amps. So if you have an inverter and you forget to turn it off, forget to turn off your loads, the BMS will protect the battery from going too low in voltage. This thing is going to the bitter end. It's giving it all she's got. 9.9. The reason for this discrepancy could be the internal voltage that the BMS sees versus this meter here. Oh, finally cut off 9.62 on the meter. I barely cut it. See how long it takes. Oh, there, it's recovered already at 9.5 volts. So it's a little low. And per the manual, they have a discharge cutoff voltage of 10 volts. So it's off by about 0.4 volts. Okay, so although it technically did fail the under voltage protection test by just 0.4 volts, other than that, the battery has performed well so far. If someone hadn't already had the name Die Hard, I would call this the Die Hard battery of Lifepo4. This thing just powers through. Alright, next we're going to do the teardown and check out the internal temps and the internal build. So it looks like the seam will come apart pretty easily on this battery. So I'll try to use the heat gun so I don't ruin the battery, because eventually I would like to give these away because I have no use for them. But I have to figure out what the rules are for doing that. But if that doesn't work, we'll have to use the Devastator. Yeah, it's coming loose, but With conventional tools, it's just going to be so beat up, it wouldn't even be worth sending, so time to bring out the big guns. So the mold literally goes, they fill this with glue, right? Or they heat it, I don't know exactly how, but this is all, it's like silicone, and it's just straight in there. So both sides is clamped down. Looks like a good 1/4 of an inch. You'd have to heat the whole thing up uniformly and lift it off. I just don't think it's possible. Check it out, this thing is completely encased in foam. If you did the egg drop, the thing would just bounce off the ground. So they told me that the cells in this battery are from Eve. So I did a quick QR check, and in fact they are from Eve, and they were manufactured in just August of this year. So that's really good. These are brand new cells. And the BMS is JBD. So both good products. So they told me that this battery does have low temp cutoff, but the early versions of this battery, the low temp cutoff setting is set to -20 degrees, basically making it useless. So if you do need low temp cutoff, the newer versions of the battery that have corrected that setting to 0 to 2 degrees Celsius. That's where it should be. That's basically freezing. So just make sure if you order this battery, ask them, and you need low temp cutoff, be sure to ask them if you get the corrected version of the battery. So taking a look at the BMS, it does appear to be a JDB BMS, but let's go ahead and see if we can verify that. So it does appear to be a JDB BMS, and look at it, it has drop protection. That's funny. Remember earlier I mentioned about egg drop. So the main connectors for the C- and B- look to be a double number 6 battery cable, so that's definitely sufficient. The main positive looks to be like a number 4 battery cable, so that's definitely sufficient. The BMS has a nice large heatsink. It's insulated from the battery pack, so that's good. The temperature sensor is taped down right here, and it's also glued right underneath the bus bar. That's really secure. And the bus bars are welded to the cells. And the balance leads are screwed into the bus bars. Very clean build. So it looks like the cells are wrapped in fiber tape. It looks like they have foam pad in between the cells. It doesn't span the entire cell, but they have it on the bottom and on the top, so that's really good. Let's test the temperature sensors. Okay, so the first test we're going to do is a high temp cutoff. So we're going to apply a little charge to the battery. We should see about 5 amps on Wampa. Okay, we're charging the battery with 5 amps. Now we're going to heat the sensor up, and it should cut the charge off to the battery. There it goes. So that works. My heat gun has 2 lasers, so it's really hard. Okay, it just kicked back on. Alright, so that's good. Okay, next we're going to do the low temp cutoff. We're just going to freeze it and see if it cuts off. So it's charging the battery right now. There it goes, it cut off. Awesome. This thing works perfect. There it goes, and we're charging again. Awesome. I gotta say guys, I am pretty impressed with this battery. This thing is a little powerhouse. It meets or exceeds both the capacity and the surge capacity. The only thing I could find wrong with the battery was the low voltage cutoff at 9.6 volts. It really should be 10 volts on the nose, or a very minimum 9.9 volts. They have this battery currently listed on Amazon for $229, so they're going to give Lead Time a run for their money at that price. So yeah, I think I would give this a 4.5 out of 5. So yeah, pretty impressed. So since this is my first retail battery review, I contemplated for a couple days Am I going to be a teardown guy, or am I just going to test the battery? So I thought back about my older videos and the kind of testing that I like to do, and I like to be thorough. So I figured the only way to be thorough is to do a teardown. So unfortunately, I don't like ruining the battery, but hey, in order to test everything, you really have to do it. So yeah, I mean, how else are you going to test the low temp or like the build quality? So you don't know what BMS is in there or how well it's constructed. So when you're buying batteries, cells are pretty much cells. Nowadays, they're pretty much standardized. They're all decent quality unless you're knowingly buying some crap cells from somewhere. Cells can always produce a lot of power, right? So it really comes down to the BMS, I would say, more than the cells. Cells matter for sure, but really the BMS, what its features are, how strong it is. So you're really, when you're buying Lifepo4 batteries, you really want to scrutinize the BMS and what its capabilities are. So yeah, that's it, guys. I'll see you in the next one.